Welcome to part 4 of this 3.0 to 3.4 liter swap on a second generation 4Runner. In part 4, we're gonna show you the awesome custom muffler work that Mitchell Muffler did for Brendan, and then we're gonna tie up all the little loose ends that Brendan needed to finish on his own because unfortunately, after 6 days of wrenching, Brendan's time was up and he had to get back home to his family and to work. And so we basically gave Brendan his homework assignment, and he worked on tying up all the other things that he had to do to finish up this job pretty much on his own with the help of his dad on some of it back in the Sparks, Reno, Nevada area. The things that he did on his own are as follows. Number one, he took care of cutting the hood so the hood would fit over the plenum, and then he put the hood scoop in. He mounted the cruise control unit and got the cruise control working. Number 3 is he got the tachometer working. Number 4 is he had to figure out a spot to mount the OBD2 port. Number 5 is we're gonna talk about the ECU mounting because it was a little bit different because of the size of the wiring harness. Another thing we're gonna cover is something that might happen to you, which happened to Brendan if you go with the ORS headers, is that we noticed that the rear heater lines were rubbing up against the header flange and it was causing a vibration that was driving Brendan crazy. And Brendan finally figured it out, what was causing it, and we want to show you that location in case you get the ORS headers yourself and notice you have some type of rattle that's driving you nuts. And then the other thing that was rubbing up against the header was one of the coil brake lines on that driver's side, and we'll show you that too, so you'll know about that to pull that brake line away from the header. And then another thing we're going to talk about is the clutch bracket. If you remember in part 3, we decided to put the clutch bracket attached to the body, and the guys at ORS noticed that and told us that's a mistake because now that metal line coming off the clutch slave cylinder that's attached to the bell housing is going to be taking up the vibration of the engine moving, and you don't want the metal line to be absorbing all that force. You want the bracket attached to the engine and not the body, so it's the rubber line that's taking up the movement from the engine, and it's not the metal line that's taking all that fatigue, which would eventually break that metal line. And then the final thing, which is another thing we mentioned in part 3, where we first had the starter wire harness attached right at the stock location behind the crankshaft pulley, and we thought it was going to work with a couple hose clamps, but then found out that the crank pulley would hit it. We're going to discuss how Brendan plans on making a custom bracket to be able to mount it in that same similar location, but just a little bit lower and further away from the crank pulley, so there won't be any rubbing of the crank pulley on the harness, which would eventually destroy the harness, which would be a bad thing. So without further ado, because I blah 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 plenty, let's get started with part 4. Mitchell Muffler in Modesto, California, and Larry's gonna hook us up with the necessary muffler work so Brendan's truck doesn't sound like a Harley chopper going down the road. So we're gonna get it off the trailer and we're gonna get it into Larry's shop, and he's gonna do all the necessary muffler work from the crossover pipe all the way back to the tailpipe. Here we go. Got the rig up on a lift at Mitchell Muffler, and we're going to get started on this. We got a couple pieces from ORS, this custom downpipe section that connects up to the crossover pipe, and then we got this flex coupler, and we're going to get started. They're gonna run a new pipe all the way from the crossover pipe, starting off with the custom down pipe and then going to this coupler next. And then they're gonna run some O2 sensor bungs so they can install the upstream and downstream O2 sensors. And then you're gonna have a MagnaFlow catalytic converter in between the two sensors. And then you're gonna have your MagnaFlow muffler and then the tailpipe. And that's what we're gonna do here.
The old trusty wire does the trick every time.
Pretty slick. I like that.
You couldn't do without it.
Yeah.
I like that right there. Two up there, one out there.
A hole for one of the O2 sensors, the upstream one. You see, he got the bend he wanted with the pipe using a little metal rod, and he's matching up those bends with the tubing bender. Pretty cool technique.
The only way to go. I need to take two off that bend, Joe. We'll go from there, a little more bend there. A little more bend there. We're going to kick it somewhere like so.
They're down there looking at tips.
That's all right.
So what's the name of this business?
Hardware Express.
Hardware Express.
Any tip you can imagine. 3.5 by 18 straight cut. 4 by 18 rolled.
That's one of those big diesel trucks.
No, them diesel truck tips are over here.
Oh.
Sections. We got catalytic converters.
Show them the coffin.
co-
muffler.
We got mufflers.
Coffin muffler. What's the
Yeah.
coffin muffler?
It's a brand.
Oh.
We have a coffin muffler. Everybody's
No way.
just dying to get it.
Pardon the pun.
We have a little selection of tips, a variety.
Wow.
Some resonators, some flex pipes, some Y pipes, some X pipes.
Wow, you guys got a whole bunch of stuff. So this is just somebody else's business, but you can come in here and get what you need?
Correct. She gives us run of the place. She's never here. She opens and closes. She comes in, we write down what we get, we sell it, and we pay her at the end of the week.
Wow, that's convenient.
Hella convenient. That's where I can make a sell. Diesel tips, 5, 6, 7, rolled, straight.
Look at all this cool stuff that you can get at Mitchell Muffler. And
I'm Larry. I work at Mitchell Muffler. Come down and see us for your exhaust needs. We customize and special exhaust on any cars.
What makes you better than the competition? What do you guys do that the other guys can't do?
Custom exhaust, and we got a warehouse located next to us. Our best feature is customer service, and the good work is there. So customer service, we like to make sure our customers are happy, they get what they want. We never like to let them settle for nothing. If we got to wait and order it, that's what we do.
And just to let you guys know, Nick at Yota1 Performance recommended Mitchell Muffler, and that's why we're here. I really respect Nick's opinion on things, and when he tells me his shop is really high quality, I believe him. And so we're actually seeing it right now. The guys that are doing the work for Brendan's second gen 4Runner are doing some top-notch work. So if you are anywhere in the Modesto area or you're willing to travel a little bit, I highly recommend you use Mitchell Muffler for your custom exhaust needs. These guys do great work. So here is the final result of this nice work at Mitchell Muffler. Got the upstream O2 sensor. You've got the MagnaFlow catalytic converter, some hanger work there. Got a MagnaFlow muffler, and then some other hanger work there, and you've got the tailpipe section. And a nice cool chrome exhaust tip. These guys do great work here. All right, thank you, Mandel.
You're welcome anytime.
Good work. Brendan, are you happy with the exhaust work at Mitchell Muffler?
Sick mods, bro.
They do some sick work here. Okay, let's see what this thing sounds like.
Yeah.
Start her up.
It won't start.
I lose my mind. Nice. Sounds good. It's not annoyingly loud. I like that.
MagnaFlow, your go-to muffler.
Sick mods, bro. I gotta grab cash with these guys here. I'm back.
So at this point, we're going to start working on the cutout to create the clearance in the hood. To accomplish this job, first thing that we need to do is remove the insulator that's often found underneath the hood. So I did that. I just used a little forked metal tool. A plastic one would be better if you have it, just a trim removal tool of that style to remove these plastic fastener clips that keep that insulator pinned down to these holes. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do after we've kind of looked at how this is gonna clear is I'm gonna try to just remove these center cross support brackets, and based on other information on different threads and Yota Tech, I'm gonna go that route first and see if we can remove this section here, and then this section, and this section, and basically take this whole triple forked piece out. Then we're gonna reattach the hood and see if I have enough clearance at that point. If not, that'll give me a flatter surface to attach a molding clay to. That way I can get a good impression of which part of the plenum is contacting first.
What Brendan is doing here is using some fishing line to get underneath the support member of the hood, and he's pulling on it in a sawing action to cut through some adhesive that secures the support members to the main part of the hood.
All right, so we wanted to make some notes with the hood scoop. Mistakes were made and lessons were learned. So we're gonna point some of those things out. With this race composite hood scoop that I went with, there are 7 attachment points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Obviously, we missed one of them. Part of that is how I decided to cut this hole. So one thing that I'd recommend when you're removing these cross member supports for the hood, you really only need to do this triple fork section that runs down. And then I took out this additional piece, which does not need to be removed. Although I was close on this template, you really don't need this big of a hole initially, especially on this section up here, which sits further up on the plenum. This is fairly low, and you're not really going to have any issue right here. I've seen some guys make this hole as small as just this portion right here, which really just captures this piece right here, which I may still need to make some modifications when the supercharger comes this spring, because that last pulley on the supercharger is going to stick out a little bit further. So I may need to make an additional cut right here, which is not really going to impact where I have the hood scoop. So unfortunately, I didn't capture the actual cutting of the hole in the hood. It's kind of one-handed, so it was difficult for me to do that. But this is essentially what I used, is a jigsaw from Black & Decker, and made my cut on the actual hood with a metal blade using this saw. Basically just made one purchase hole with a drill bit, and then I used that jigsaw. I traced a cardboard piece template that I had made for the hood portion, and then I traced it with Sharpie and made the cut on the hood. To figure out where the main points of contact are from the plenum to the hood, I used a children's molding clay, and I basically flattened a piece out, pressed it lightly on this portion, and then I shut the hood. And that not only left a piece of the clay indicator on the hood, but it also made a depression on the plenum and this portion of bracketry where I was making contact when the hood closed. That way I had a really good idea of where to make my template. Once I did that, I basically just put a piece of cardboard up here and traced it, and then I cut that cardboard out and made a template. And obviously, like I said, you can make this smaller. I went way too far back just out of an abundance of caution, which I would avoid doing that if you can. So there are a lot of different options that you could use for hood scoops. I chose to go with a fiberglass composite from a company called Race Composites. They're an online retailer. They manufacture a pretty decent product for a reasonable price. I think this cost me about $120 after shipping. Comes with the scoop. It comes with a little rubber gasket seal that can go around the outside. And then it's got 6 studs with bolts. In addition, there are a lot of different methods that you can use for hood scoops. One that I like the most, but I chose not to use, is guys that have taken a 3rd gen scoop and they've cut it out in a square pattern and then grafted it onto the original hood. And that's a pretty clean install as well. I needed something that was going to be a little bit taller because I do plan on doing the supercharger in the spring. So I'm at the point of putting it on. Wanted to just make a couple quick notes of how I measured. Essentially, I started up here at the washer nozzles. I got a base reference measurement between the two, and I used that as my starting point. And then I, to the best of my ability, created a square pattern with tape, and I utilized that square, took rough measurements off the scoop itself, and then based on those measurements, laid out this hood scoop. One other thing we're gonna do to check how square it is on the front ends is we're gonna take diagonal measurements from each corner to the tip of the hood scoop, like so. That'll give us a rough idea of how close we are. In addition to doing the diagonal measurement, I went ahead and took a measurement, a beam from this bolt to the edge of the hood, from about here to the edge of the hood, vice versa on both sides. And then I also did one up here just to get a rough idea of how it was measuring side to side and front to back. And we were pretty close. We made about 1/8 of an inch of adjustments. And now on both sides, in about 6 different measuring points, we're within a 1/16 of an inch. So we're gonna call that good. And I'll go ahead and trace where I'm gonna be drilling. And I'll go ahead and make those holes and pop this bad boy on. Once I've got this drilled and mounted where I want it, I'm actually gonna send this into a body shop and have them redo the entire hood and paint match the hood scoop as well. All right, here's the finished product. If you choose to keep your cruise control functioning, there are several different ways that you can make that happen. One of those is to use the 3.4 liter electronic cruise control module, which is this system here. One advantage of using this is you can mount this to the passenger side fender well, and then you'll have not only close to the correct cable length, but you'll also have the correct cable end that connects into the throttle body connection. The disadvantage of using this system is you're gonna have to source not only the cruise control unit, but you'll also have to source the cruise control selector switch from a 3.4 steering column. And then you'll have to mount that and splice in the correct wiring for that lever on the shifting column. For me, I'm gonna use the existing 3-liter cruise control module, which is a vacuum operated system. There are a couple different ways to accomplish this. One of which was our initial idea, was to extend the cruise control wires and mount this on the passenger side fender well. And then we were gonna take this cable from a 3.4 liter connection so that we have the correct length and the correct end, and then just extend those wires and come up with a mounting bracket system on the passenger side fender well. After giving it some thought, I'm gonna still use the existing 3-liter, but I'm gonna keep it in its stock location, and I'm gonna extend the cable and then make a new end that will connect into the 3.4-liter throttle body connection. I made a trip to my local Giant bike store, and their service shop helped me out in looking at several different options. And what we came up with is what's called a NARP for mountain bike systems, which happened to be pretty much the exact same end as what's on the existing 3.4 liter cable. And then I have a custom cable, and then the cable cover, which is just a Shimano standard bicycle cable cover. So I'm gonna create my own custom cable length, and we're gonna use the existing 3-liter. So I'm gonna show you how to take that apart and accomplish that right now. The first thing you wanna do is disconnect these 3 bolts, because we're gonna free this cable. And these are 3 7mm bolts. With that free, you can see that there's a cotter pin right here. So I've started to undo that. Once that cotter pin is free, you can go ahead and slide this out, and you'll see that this is where the cable terminates. And it's just got an end link, which is very similar to the end link on the cable that I've purchased. So that was kind of a bear to get these 2 pieces of the cable removed. You could see the end on this one is slightly crimped, and that bicycle cable sleeve goes into there and butts up right towards the end piece of this right there. And what I ended up having to do to get that free is this bicycle cable, if you're not familiar with it, kind of coils around. So I slowly just worked at it until I freed that piece and this little sleeve that covers it. And I had to do that on this end too, and I kind of widened the flare a little, so I'll try to recrimp that a little bit. Unfortunately, I can't find this piece. I could probably find a piece like this, but I could not find this piece anywhere in the factory service manual or anywhere online for that matter. So it's kind of a pain in the ass to get there, but I got there. So I'm gonna go ahead and reuse these pieces and start putting that new cable together. Here's the orientation as I'm threading this new cable through. We'll have this small piece right here where the cotter pin went through, be in that orientation, and that'll go into this housing connection, I guess we'll call it, and then the cable. Because I've chosen to use the existing location and run a longer cable, I'm gonna have to be a little more creative with where I mount this Evap canister. So I'm gonna end up turning it perpendicular to where it is now and kind of face it in line with the battery. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, and then mount this cruise control, and then I'm gonna measure the cable one more time. And once I have the correct length, I'll go ahead and cut and attach that end piece that will fit here into the throttle body assembly. I've routed it where I think I'm gonna keep it for now. So it's gonna go under this air intake and then up and around. So I'm ready to put the final end piece on. And I've utilized a lot of the existing hardware that was on the old system. These little end caps and this little rubber piece here and a little bit of the protective rubber coating that I had, just to try to keep it looking as stock and factory as possible. Obviously the silver Shimano brake line doesn't look very stock, but that's what they had, so that's what we're working with. Here's the final product. Got it hooked in here, cinched down tight, and you can see that it's in place and it fit pretty much perfect. This NARP that we sourced from the bicycle shop is a Allen wrench style. It's got 2 different size Allen wrenches on each side, and it's essentially just a bolt that you screw in. So you can see there's a small hole on the end of it you take your cable and you poke it through, and then you tighten that Allen wrench against the cable till it's captured. And then I just ground off the excess with a little bit of a grinder wheel. So that's a good option for that if you're having trouble finding the correct cable. You can build your own, which I did, and it worked out well. It doesn't look too out of place, too unfactory, and I'm happy with where I ended up running the line and all the way back up to the main module. For the cruise control, the last thing that we didn't really mention was hooking back up these vacuum lines, which is fairly simple since it's labeled. You have one vacuum line that is labeled vacuum, and it runs into a T that comes down to this module piece here. And then I routed this, and you have to find some portion on the plenum where there's vacuum to connect that line. I haven't cut it to size and routed it where I wanted it, but this is where I chose to run it. Was just these, which are initially capped, but they do have vacuum to them, so this is where I'm gonna run that vacuum line. Got the cruise control functioning properly. Cruise. And set. Tested the on-off switch, the cancel switch, resume, accelerate, and set and coast switch. Everything's functioning properly. So we talked briefly about having to relocate this Evap system due to keeping the cruise control module in its factory location. Because of that, this fancy bracket that ORS provided is no longer an ideal choice. So what is going to end up happening is I'm going to be creating a custom bracket that's going to attach directly to the battery tray and basically come up with the same style prongs, but it's going to be affixed to the battery tray and then one more location underneath on the front side of this Evap. With that, I've had to redo some of my vacuum lines for the Evap system, and I've just rerouted them to try to make them as clean as possible. One thing that I didn't notate earlier is these two fuse boxes that are provided in the wiring harness from ORS. Initially, they were just loosely kind of dangled behind the Evap, and I chose to mount them on the back portion of this bracket, which I'm going to maintain that configuration as I build the custom bracket for this Evap system. It's just a good location for them. And then the last piece I wanted to touch on is the VSV sensor that comes with the stock 3.4 system. It is normally tucked back here on the firewall on the 3.4, and I kept the same bracket, but I located it underneath the driver's side fender, and I took out the stock 10mm bolt and found another OEM bolt that's longer and a nut, and basically just mounted it securely underneath here. So that's where I've chose to run that piece of the Evap system. One item that we forgot about, which is not a big deal, but it is something that should be addressed, is the check valve for the brake booster. So initially it runs along this back firewall, and there was two brackets that held this line in place against that firewall. Comes back down, and then it connects over here to the brake booster right here. So that check valve runs this way, and it used to connect to the plenum over here on the passenger side, but it's on the opposite side now over here. So it'll connect right here to the brake booster. So we went ahead and removed that. I'm going to use those existing brackets that were along that firewall to run the fuel return vapor line and some of the other lines. But we're going to go ahead and put that check valve in line with this new brake booster line here. So this is the new line, and I've made my first cut. It's going to go here, and then I'll have this second piece here. Once the vehicle's turned off, it'll prevent the brakes from being disabled. So essentially, without it, I'll turn the vehicle off and the brake pedal will no longer have that pressure supplied to it. So it'll start to roll unless you're pushed really hard on the pedal. So it's an important piece. It's not critical. It's not a huge safety item, but it is something that should be addressed. And here's the new line in place with that check valve located midline. Since we've done this swap, I've had a rattling noise while driving that came and went with certain RPM ranges. It took me a couple of months to finally track down where it was coming from, but we pinned it down to these rear heater lines. And if you look, that front heater line that's in the series of two, that exhaust flange started eating into the line itself. So that making contact was the rattling. There's enough play in both that line and this coil brake line that we were able to pull both those lines off from making contact with that exhaust flange. And that solved our rattling problem. So if you choose to go with ORS's custom exhaust headers, that's something that you want to look for as you're putting the engine in. Make sure that those lines get pulled off. If for whatever reason you do have a rattling noise, this may be the culprit. For best access to those two lines, we came in from this fender well on the driver's side front, and you have access to this coiled brake line, and then you also have good access to those rear heater lines right here. So you can see they were both making contact with this exhaust flange right here.
Here's where we attached the clutch line to the body, and that was a mistake that Derek at ORS told us about. So what Brendan plans on doing is he's going to fabricate his own bracket for the clutch line. He's going to mount it somewhere to the head and then bring it either in between the header pipes or maybe over the top of the header pipes, and then bring it over here near the fender and attach it right about in the same area, but not attached to the body anymore, but attached to the engine, so we don't fatigue this metal line that leads to the clutch slave cylinder.
So for the battery harness, initially we had it tucked up here and it was making contact with the crank pulley. So what I'm gonna do, in addition with that custom clutch bracket that I'm having made with a buddy, is we're gonna make a custom bracket for this harness that's going to drop down further than the original harness, and it's going to sit and tuck in nicely right here underneath the oil pan. And that's going to keep this harness nice and secure and out of the way from any belts. Right now it's loose and it's not making contact with anything, and I've left it that way until I have the correct length for my Evap mount and battery tray. When swapping the 3.4 liter into the second generation 4Runner, you're gonna need to put a 10K resistor on the back of the tachometer. Otherwise, your tachometer will no longer be functional. All right, so when we're trying to access the tachometer, there's some trim panels that you're gonna have to remove. Starting with this bottom kick panel here is gonna have to be removed. And there is one 10mm bolt here. The rest are gonna be Phillips head. There's gonna be one here, one over here, and one right there. And once you have all those free, you can lightly pull this down, and then you'll have your gas door and your hood latch cables right here. I'm gonna go ahead and leave those connected for now because I'm not gonna need to take this all the way out. The second piece that you're gonna have to work on removing is gonna be up here, and that'll be done before this is out of the way. I already got started on this, but it'll be right here. You're gonna access the cover plate for your climate control, which looks like this. And all you're gonna do is you're gonna lightly put some type of pry tool at the edge of it, and you're gonna start to remove it. But first, before you do that, you're gonna remove these lever control end caps. So once I have that removed, then I can start working on this. There's gonna be one Phillips head screwed here. You'll also have two that are tucked up underneath right here and right here. And then once that's removed, this is gonna be free to go ahead and come out. And like I said, again, just use a pry tool, either plastic if you have it or metal. Okay, once you've got that free, as you're freeing it, there's going to be a series of electrical connectors that you're going to have to disconnect, which will be this orange one and this black one. This orange one goes to your hazard control light switch, and then this electrical connector goes to your defrost, which on the front of the panel is right here, that one and that one. And then on this side you have your dim light control switch, and then your clutch start cancel if you have a manual transmission. So those two switches will be here. You can choose to remove these if you want to free this space, or you can just let this hang and then you're ready to access your gauge cluster. All right, to remove the gauge cluster, there's going to be 4 Phillips head screws. You're going to have one down here, one right here, and then 3 and the fourth one's right down there. Once those are removed, that cluster will break free from its housing, and then you'll have all the electrical connections that you need to disconnect. All right, with the gauge cluster removed, you can see it here. See that there's going to be 4 connections that you have to disconnect. You have one here, 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 and here. And those connections, in order from left to right, the blue one, this littler white one, smaller white one, and then the longest of the 3 white ones. All right, once you have the gauge cluster out, you're going to need to separate the front plastic piece from the actual gauge portion. So to do that, there's going to be plastic clips that attach in, I believe, 8 locations, 4 up top and then 4 on the bottom. To remove those, you just put a screwdriver in, push down, create a little bit of a wedge, and then start to gently pull back on it, and it'll start to separate. And then here's the bottom ones, before right here. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Once you have that separated, you want to turn it back on its backside. Otherwise, you'll have these engine indicators, 4-wheel drive indicator and whatnot. Those tabs, which are right here, they'll fall out on you if you have it the opposite way. So to save yourself some hassle, go ahead and flip it upside down, and then you can remove this top piece to get the tack gauge out. Okay, with the tack gauge out, this would be the back side of it. You see it's removed there. We're gonna put this 10K ohm resistor, and it's gonna connect at 2 points right here and right here. And you can see on the back side, if I could show it, there's actually a resistor on the opposite side that's already there. I'm not 100% sure if that has to stay in place, so we're gonna try and leave that there and just get this 10K resistor. All the forums, including the information that ORS gave us, it looks like most people just put it right on top here on this back side and call it a day. So I'm not 100% sure if this bottom one has to stay in place or not, but we're gonna attempt to leave it there. And this is the 10K ohm resistor that we're gonna be using. Went ahead and pre-bent it, and then we're gonna go ahead and attempt to solder it in here. And then you can see I have extras just in case we botch this the first go around. All right, so here's what we're left with. Looks like we did okay. So now we're gonna go ahead and reinstall this and fire up the truck and see if we did a good enough job. All right, and here you can see we have a working tack, and it's obviously a little high because it's cold temp. So I'm gonna let it sit here and see if that comes down to normal operating range, which it should. And here's the nighttime shot, but the tack has come down to a normal working range. And you can see as I throttle up, the tack is functioning normally. So with this ECU and the custom harness, it had a little bit more bulk to it than the original wiring harness. So you have to kind of be creative about how you stuff everything up in behind this. And then the one other thing, when you're reinstalling, make sure this piece of carpet goes all the way behind this bracket where the plastic nut attaches to on the trim piece. So I got it in there. Again, we used those stock bracketry that comes off the 3 liters ECU and attaches to the 5VZ-E ECU. But I got it all tucked in there. The one additional note is the 7th injector harness. At some point I'll have to find a place to mount that, but for right now the connection port and the pigtail that I've plugged into it, which acts as a dummy, is tucked up kind of behind this speaker system, and it'll stay there until I've put the supercharger on. If you recall, I had 2 separate electrical lines that come out from the harness that are much longer in length. One of those is the OBD2 sensor, and the other is the kill switch, which I've run along this firewall. The kill switch I've hidden in a very secret location, and the OBD2 sensor I've basically run up along the firewall underneath this carpet and then to the other side. And if you look closely, this piece right here kind of bevels out and comes and attaches here. So it was about the perfect size for this OBD2 sensor, and I stole 2 of my screws, trim screws, which I will source at a pick and pull. I've stolen 2 from this panel, and I mounted the OBD2 sensor right here, and then I neatly tucked that OBD2 line, and it runs up underneath here and then kind of back behind the centerpiece and goes into the carpet and up along the firewall.
All right, we are finally done with this project, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you learned something, because we learned a lot from this. I know Brendan and I did, and Sean and Ton. We were up against the clock, and we pulled off the bulk of it in the 6 days we had available. Brendan was able to, at his leisure, figure out all the other things that he had to figure out to complete this job. And he still has a little bit of work to do, but for the most part, this is a operational truck that he can now go take out and have fun with. Like I said at the beginning of the video series, you have choices of how you go about this. Number one, going with ORS for the custom wiring harness and all the other custom things that they provided for this job to make this job much more plug and play for us. We are totally happy with that decision. You can go another route if you want, but we highly recommend you use ORS for a lot of the stuff you need for the swap. You have choices on what engine you go with. Like I said, you can get a used engine somewhere domestically, you can get a used JDM engine from Japan, or you can go the route we did by getting a high quality rebuilt engine from a company like Yota1 Performance. And we are very happy with our decision because that's the best way to go, to put a rebuilt engine in, so you know you're going to have just thousands and thousands and thousands of trouble-free miles, and you're not going to have to worry about having to swap out another motor because you find out the used motor you got was a piece of junk. So we highly recommend to go the rebuilt route, and going with the Yota1 Performance engine is the way to go in our opinion. Along with Off-Road Solutions, ORS, and Yota1 Performance, there were other companies that assisted us in making this project happen. We have MotorWest Performance that hooked us up with some nice fuel injectors, so Brendan's nicely rebuilt Yota1 engine is going to run better with flow matched injectors. So thank you, Martin Diaz at MotorWest Performance, for hooking us up. You're going to most likely want to redo the exhaust and muffler work. We got that done at Mitchell Mufflers. So we want to thank Larry and the guys at Mitchell Muffler for hooking us up with some great exhaust and muffler work. For the job, we needed some parts at the last minute, and our buddy Josh Young at the Pacific Northwest 4Runner connection came through for us big time at the 11th hour. He got us some needed parts, second day air, and was instrumental in us being able to complete this project in the time limit we had. We also want to thank Stevens Creek Toyota for being our local parts department that we could depend on to get us the parts we needed quickly, because we had to make quite a few runs to Stevens Creek Toyota, and because they have a warehouse in San Francisco, even if they don't have the parts in stock at that given day, they can get them to you the next day, like early in the morning at 7 a.m. So they were instrumental in us being able to get the last minute parts that we needed to complete this job. I want to thank my buddy Ton for showing up and helping out with this project. He was a big help, and like I said at the beginning of the series, multiple hands makes an engine swap much easier, especially when it comes to dropping the new engine in. You have eyes on either side of the engine, you have eyes underneath the vehicle, you have somebody working the engine hoist. It just helps to have multiple hands. So thank you, Ton, for showing up and helping us out. I also want to thank my lovely wife Allison for helping out, because when we're in the throes of battle and the time is ticking and we don't have time to go take a leisurely lunch, Allison every single day went and got us lunch, got us dinner, and took really good care of us. So I want to thank Allison for being a good helper for this project and supporting our efforts. Thank you, Allison. This was quite the learning experience. All in all, it went very well for us, especially with the time restraints that we had. I don't recommend you try to rush this process. Take your time and enjoy it. It wasn't exactly enjoyable for us because we were stressed on time. So don't put that pressure on yourself. Take your time and just really enjoy the process and get it done at your leisure. That's what I recommend. Unfortunately, Sean couldn't make it. He had something pull him away at the last second, and he couldn't be here for this final filming, which is unfortunate because he was a huge part of this from beginning to end. He was part of it all 6 days. So it sucks that Sean couldn't be here for the final shot, but Brendan was already committed to coming on this date, and it just didn't work out for Sean. So there it is there. All right. Squeeze. All right. We thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean and special guests Ton, Brendan, and Allison. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you have any questions or comments, do that below. Take care. Bye-bye. Sick mods and sick 3.0 to 3.4 liter swaps on a second generation 4Runner. Peace out. Happy wrenching. Bye-bye.
Yay!
Yeah.
All right.